What's up YouTube, and welcome back for part 2 of the single overhead cam STI hybrid build. In this episode I want to start working on the block that will be going into the car, the short block I should say. So this is the short block from Tyler's STI that I just removed from his car, and this is what I plan on putting back into the car, or into my car. We know number 4 piston actually failed, cracked ring lands. I've already taken out number 1 piston as well, so 2 and 3 are still left in there. Need to pop those pistons out. So I won't be splitting this block. It didn't make any noise before I removed it from his car, and I'm confident that the bottom end's good, other than losing compression on number 4 really bad. And I think a set of replacement pistons is you know, they're going to be cheap set of replacement pistons just to get this thing running again, and it's not going to hit the same numbers, the same horsepower numbers as it did before running in my car, so it should be an extremely reliable block for what I want to use it for. But I do want to go over some of the parts that I have on hand already. I do have more on order, I just don't have them yet. So we'll start with the piston, knocking these pistons out. We'll go over some of the parts I have, and then I think I'm actually going to start cleaning this guy up.
Symmetry, flow designed like weaponry to blow your mind like Kennedy, with rhymes slicker than Hennessy. Girlies falling over me, now I see the jealousy. So you wanna be my enemy, the fuck you thinking, G? It's time to see you with a smile on my face. While you grilling, I'll be steady moving up in pace. Living this life is a race, I just pray they embrace. The skill I'm bringing has you rappers all up in the haze like stop what I'm about to do. While they send steaming, I'll be cooling kind of revenue. They looking around for something new, then they came right out of blue like I was packing the tool. But I'm just rapping, it's cool. Know you can do anything you want to do, but you need the passion to pursue without a rear view. Fear I've had to see it through, flew above my peers. While they sipping beers, I'll be giving years in the studio, anticipating the cheers. Hold up.
So now that all the old pistons are of the block, might as well talk about some of the parts I'll be using. And that includes a new set of pistons. These are very, very cheap replacement pistons. I do not know what's going to happen, but they look like perfectly fine replacements. And so they're standard size. They look very close to original casting. They have the wrist pins, and I'm pretty sure the clips are all in there, but so I got the whole set of 4 of these. Very cheap, very budget minded. I've also got the set of standard rings to go with it. And when you think about it, well, in most cases at least you would probably own that cylinder, the number 4 cylinder. You might go through all of them if you're going to put in new pistons and rings. I'm pretty confident that I'm going to have a decent break-in with these rings and pistons in that block, and should produce pretty good compression numbers. I don't see why it won't. This block has low mileage on it. There's 50,000 kilometers, about 30,000 miles. So I mean, I don't see why it's not going to work for my purpose. So I also went ahead and I bought a oil pump. I was going to take the one off of the engine that's in the car, but I decided for the cost of it, a new oil pump was a good price. Doesn't really have a brand name on it, but it's painted nice black, and it came with all the hardware, and it is rated for 10 STI, so it is. I'm pretty sure it's 10 millimeter, and so that's going to work awesome. And then over here we got a box of gaskets. So I'm just a Felpro guy. I've used Felpro since I was started in this trade. I don't speak highly of these Permatorque MLS gaskets, but they've done every job that I've needed them to do, and they're great price. So I mean, I got STI gaskets to match up the block. I'm not so sure if there's any real filing that needs to be done. These should actually open up to the 251 heads pretty good. And then it's some exhaust manifold gaskets and intake gaskets. I've got a set of spark plugs, but I'm just looking at the old ones, and over there on the toolbox. The old ones look actually reusable. I don't see why I couldn't reuse them. Even the one that was taken, number 4, is taking a little bit of oil. That cylinder was still firing off with power, so the oil pump actually has a new crank seal in it. It also has the rear seal for the oil pump. I've got cam seals coming. I've got a rear main seal here in another box, with that box, I think. And I've got a timing belt coming. I'm going to reuse all the idlers and the tensioner because I know they're really good shape. I've got a water pump coming. I've got a new wideband O2 sensor coming, just a Bosch replacement sensor for the wideband because I think it failed and it, didn't alert me that there was problems going on. I have valve seals coming, so I do plan on probably taking apart the heads, taking all the valves out, at least doing a lapping in the valves and maybe polishing up the head a little bit, because the intake's already polished. I'd like to actually think about gasket matching so that, if I take the extra time, I might actually port the heads a little bit. Now that the pistons are out of the block, I'm going to go ahead and actually clean this block up, and I'm going to think about spraying it because I've got a lot of primer, I've got a lot of black, and I think I could probably spray the block. It just kind of helps from corrosion setting in again. It's kind of hard to actually see the block down through, and that's what
On that rookie contract, still got a couple years. I got my sights beyond that, but got 100 fears, 100 dreams, 100 pains, 100 nights I stayed awake. Count on me to triple that, I'm banking on no change of pace. Day to day, I'm moving like a greyhound bus. Blessings coming down, they just tend to stay around us. Cause we the product of a God, a father, mother. I got a lot of love to give my city, best believe they need my come up. I'm manifesting life and see no other option.
So it's actually 24 hours later, or close to it, and the paint has had plenty of time to actually cure on the block, and it feels really good. It's nice and durable. It was really hard to get good good amounts of it down in here without overspraying. But it doesn't have to be perfect. It's generally going to be covered by the intake manifold and a bunch of other stuff. But you're going to be able to see these outlying pieces where the block will kind of shine through, hopefully a little bit. Maybe keep it a little cleaner and the corrosion off of it a little bit too. So next, I'm starting to run a little bit short for time, I think, but I do want to size up some rings and see if I need to open them up a little bit. So I got to go about checking some ring gap, and because I've got new pistons, new rings, and in a lot of cases with OEM replacements, you can just stab those guys in there and you're good to go. A lot of manufacturers will state that, and even the documentation I got with the rings doesn't say anything about filing ring gap on them. So I'm probably not going to be hitting boost levels of what the STI block, 14 and a half, 16 up to there, like that's probably going to be quite high for my application until I can actually get more fuel into the engine. So I got a feeling that I'll be able to stick close to stock and get it bang on. I've read all kinds of different numbers all over the internet, but people are using, they're after using forged pistons and whatever, they seem to open up the ring gap quite wide. So I'm just going to double check to see what I can find in the service manual, compare it to what I found on the forums, and then kind of come up with my own numbers, measure up the rings and see how close they are to those numbers. So I've looked up the factory piston ring gap, and they want the top at 9 to 11 thou of ring gap. The second ring is supposed to be 15 to 20 thousandths of an inch. Now I measured the top ring. It's got double the gap of what spec should be, which still seems to be good for a high boost application. But then the second ring falls right at the shortest gap, so it would be opened up a little bit. So I've been contemplating for about the last hour what I'm going to do. I've read through some more forums, and the ring gaps aren't ideal. They're not perfect, but I'm not going to be producing STI power out of this block. Cylinder pressure is going to be lower, and I think that I'm going to be able to get away using these rings. I don't see why not. It's better to be a little bit too loose than too tight. Double what the factory spec is, though. I realize a lot of guys just putting in the stock pistons again are gapping them open a little bit more anyway. So that's the plan as of right now. So I think I'm going to start loading rings onto pistons and think about dropping them in. So I've gone ahead and I've got the first piston all loaded with a set of rings on it. I would have liked to get into doing that, but I'm sure at some point I'm going to do a full tear down or rebuild on a block, so I really just kind of want to get this together. So here I've actually got this kit I bought off, I think, Amazon quite a while ago, because I realized I was probably going to end up doing this job, and it's just a cheap kit, but I've already had this on top of the piston and squeezed it with the pliers, and seems like it's going to work just fine. Really cheap kit, and it's got so many sizes that it just seems so universal. I'll be able to use it for any piston. So before I go popping the piston in, I've just ran the compressor and filled it up. I need to at least clean this deck up. I'd rather do it now. That way I can get the cylinders cleaned out really well. Make sure there's nothing in there before I set the pistons in place. And so I'm just going to take the roll-off disc or the brush and go along, clean that up, and get ready to sit a slug down onto a rod. So I went ahead and cleaned up the deck surface of the block to the point pretty much ready to put a gasket on it. Just have to use a bit of brake clean. Wiped out the cylinder, and I'm ready to actually put a bit of oil in the cylinder. I just like taking my hand and putting it completely around the cylinder wall, make sure it's completely covered. And then I need the access on my handle. Start wiping on the piston skirts. I need a bit more oil on the piston. That's where things can get a little bit a little dirty if you're not careful. Just apply it along the rings. Don't need a lot, but enough to coat everything. You want to try and maintain your ring position. They are supposed to be maintained in an order. Make sure you get the wrist pin journals. So now I'm ready to try and set this cheapo spring compressor or ring compressor on here. Grab the pliers and just start squeezing it all together. Make sure your rag's not in there. And I think we could start popping this piston in the way it's sitting right there. So I've actually wiped off a bit too much oil off here, I think. Make sure you have a good hold of this when you're working with it like that. You don't want it slipping out of there. Falling on the concrete floor. So you want to line up your piston. These dots usually, or always actually, denote the front of the engine, so where the crank pulley would be. You want those pointed in that direction. And once you get it seated up to this point, take your plastic mallet or a little bit of wooden, piece of wooden hammer, and just slowly start knocking the piston into place. So I don't know, in my personal experience, that piston seemed to be too tight going in, and that could be a major problem. I'll have to get the wrist pin in place, get it clipped up, and turn the crank and see what it actually feels like and what kind of resistance is against it. Because, you know, obviously you got to knock pistons in, but maybe, you know, even a new piston might cause a little extra friction. But to me, initially, it just seemed to be too tight. So after a bit of convincing, I finally got the piston down into place, lined up with the rod, and I've got the wrist pin through. I'm just going to put this outer clip in place. It looks good. So I fought to get the piston lined up, but I finally got the wrist pin to actually go through and into place. I got the snap ring in place. So I kind of want to give this thing a turn and see what it actually feels like. Doesn't feel too bad. Feels better than I thought it would, to be honest. So I'm going to go ahead and put in this piston off camera, and I'll come back, we'll show the finished results of this one side, and then I'll probably conclude this video after that. So as you can see, I've got the other piston in place, and it seemed to drop in a little smoother than number 4. Number 4 seems to be a little bit too tight. And probably if I was, you know, working in a machine shop or building engines, I would probably maybe deem that too tight. But with both pistons in, the crank still turns really free. There's not very much resistance against it, and all I'm using is an oversized pair of channel locks on this flat spot of the oil pump to actually turn it, and it turns pretty easy. So I mean, you know, we're not going for big numbers. This is an extremely ghetto budget build. This crank would have supported 300 horsepower in the STI. It's definitely not going to be doing that much in my car. Even if I did get the car tuned, I don't see it hitting that kind of number. I just don't need it to. And I realize what I'm doing is, you know, against the rules, you know. I didn't split the case, I haven't owned the cylinders, I haven't measured very much. Some of my measurements were off with ring gap and I still decided to use them, so I've done a number of things incorrectly here, and that's why you didn't get to see the whole thing being done. But I just, I kind of noticed that this is my 150th upload, and I didn't expect to actually get this many videos up. I did expect to have to take breaks, and the flow of content would be a lot slower, but I've just been able to maintain this now, and I can pick up my pace a little bit more because I'm doing my own stuff. So yeah, thanks again to everyone watching, giving me that support. 150 videos in, it's been a lot of work. If you like this video, definitely give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please consider hitting that subscribe button for me. Go check out my Instagram if you have a chance. Leave your questions and comments further down below, and I'll see you in the next one.